and how we feel about it, and maybe some of our experiences. My intention is not to be grim, though I know this is a topic that many people have a hesitation about thinking about, talking about it, sharing about it, and considering it. And I may throw a few questions out to folks just to, to see what your thinking is. I'm going to start with my own journey. 1981, my father died 15 days before Christmas. That was the Christmas we didn't have in our family. I mean, nobody just felt like celebrating that year. And he had been diagnosed in October, late October of that year, with pancreatic cancer, and fortunately, he didn't linger too long. He was 61 when he died. I had just gotten home from college like the year before. I was looking for work and had not found regular work yet. So I was feeling kind of frustrated. I was frustrated because I had to, after college, you kind of expect to go out and get started on your own, and I just couldn't find a job that I needed. So I moved back home, and my father was diagnosed with the pancreatic cancer. He elected to die at home. He probably put up with maybe about a week or two of chemo and realized the chemo wasn't going to do anything. In fact, he was sicker with the chemo than he was with the disease at that point. So we decided to let nature take its course. We got him signed into the hospice of Cincinnati, and they provided home hospice care. The night that he passed, it was a Thursday night, the night that he passed, my fiance, who's not my wife, my fiance and I had gone downtown Cincinnati. I'd gone to look for some work, and then we decided to take a break from the house. And my mother had her work that she was doing, so a man by the name of Julian, who lived across the street, who was a good friend, he was a good friend of my father, had come over and just sat with him during that afternoon while the family was out for a couple hours. Tanya, my wife, and I get, my fiance at the time, and I got back to the house, and my mother got back about 15, 20 minutes later. We walked in, thanked Julian. Julian left the house. My father was lying there in the hospital bed that hospice was providing for him. And I noticed that his sheets had become soiled, and I pointed it out to my mother, so she prepared to change the sheets. My father, who was 5'6", had lost so much weight because of the cancer that I could literally pick him up in my hands. So that's what I did. I picked him up in my arms, and while I was holding him and my mother was getting ready to change the sheets, I felt something change. I can't describe it. It was a sudden limpness I had not felt since before, and I turned to Mama and I said, "Mom, he's gone." And of course, we notified the hospice, and hospice nurse came in and did the vitals check, and he had expired while I held him. That was the first close encounter with death that I had ever had. From 1999 to 2001, I was on the chaplaincy staff at the Twin Towers Retirement Community in Southern Ohio, which is the second largest retirement community in that part of the state. And during that period, I was attendant to the families and to those who were passing and passed. I saw several people pass before me. And this kind of it was not a negative experience for me. It was good to be useful. And I was on a pager, so that sometimes a charge nurse would call me at 3 o'clock in the morning, say, so-and-so, looks like they're changing into active dying, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. We're calling the family, could you be here to meet the family? So that was among the things that I would do, and I'd go, of course, and spend time with the person who was dying as well. We got to see some of those people pass. One person that really left an impact on me is a man by the name of Tony. He came in with inoperable cancer, knew that he was going to die, and one of the things that our nursing section would do is that we would open up a room and let hospice come in and take care of them in that room. There was the hospice. And Tony knew he was dying, and it didn't faze him. I don't know how to explain this, except that I've seen people, when they realize, when they're still cognitive and they're faced with a terminal illness, become bitter and angry, and I think that's can be a natural reaction for some people. He was not bitter or angry. In fact, he was so good to the nursing staff that who regularly saw people pass, that they cried when he passed. But anyway, I get the call, about 2 o'clock in the morning. They said, Tony is going. So I go over there to meet the family when they got there. I got there before the family did. And by the time I walked in the room, Tony had just slipped away. Now, what makes this personally unusual to me was that he died with a smile on his face. He was ready to go. He had lived fully. He cared a lot about people. He treated the nursing staff with such respect and love. It was incredible. His life was full right up to the moment that he finally passed away. And so I've had experiences like that. I've also had the experience where I walked into a room and there was a family that was gathered around there, maybe about a dozen people. And I said, how long have you been here? I said, we've been here about 3 days. And the person in the bed was a woman, and she was in a comatose state. And I said, I don't know, what are you waiting for? And they said, well, we're waiting for her to go. I said, I think you need to take care of yourselves. Go down to the cafeteria, get yourself something to eat, and then come back. Just give yourselves all a break. Now I was going on intuition on this one. And when the family left, that's when she slipped away. For some people, that moment of death is a very private moment, and I cannot explain how it happens, but some people will hang on until they're alone. My mother passed in 2008. Now, I had been attendant at so many people that were getting ready to die that I picked up on the signs she was going to go before anyone else in the family was ready to admit it. I have a brother who actually, he's a retired pastor now. He's done lots of funerals, and I'm sure he's been to things. And my sister was kind of not ready to say it, but I walked into her room. What had happened was that she'd had surgery. It had not gone well. And they'd sent her home, and she was just doing so poorly that she went back to the hospital. I get a call that she was back in the hospital, so I go back in there, and the moment I walked in the room, I said, she's not gonna make it. Now, I wasn't being pessimistic. I was just picking up on a lot of the signs, and I'll talk about some of those signs that I pick up on. It took her 5 weeks total to die. During this part of that time, she was alert, and in extreme pain. What had happened was that the botched surgery meant that she was bleeding internally and they couldn't stop it. And it's a very slow, miserable way to go. It's not the way we anticipated her going. I mean, she'd been pretty tough and hardy. It was minor surgery that she was in for, and it was one that most people would not have any difficulties afterward. The night before she passed, she was alert one last time. She was very weak. And after my brother and sister-in-law had left the room, we sat there and my mother and I talked about the good memories that we had. And the following day, she was inactive, dying, and my brother and sister-in-law hung around the room most of the day. But unlike my father, who I think waited until somebody was in the room, when my brother and sister-in-law and myself stepped out of the room, that's when she let go. And so these are some of my close encounters with death. Plus, also mentioned that in 2019, I was diagnosed with end-stage kidney disease. And I do go to have dialysis every night. My life expectancy right now, if I do not get a new kidney, is about 3 or 4 more years. And I've made my peace with that. There are things I want to get done before then. That causes me a little bit of anxiousness, but not facing my own mortality. So having walked with other people and their mortality and the way in which they lived prior to going has made me feel a bit more peaceful about where I might be. I couldn't be surprised, but that's really my life expectancy, because when you're on dialysis, after a while, the body just wears down after a while. It won't respond anymore, and that's where I am. I have a surgical implant with a hose that I hook up to a machine every night, and basically does what my kidneys should be doing. I know that when the time comes, that the end will be relatively peaceful. Death by kidney disease is not painful. Basically, you go to sleep and you don't wake up after a certain point. So these are some of my experiences of where I'm coming from, and we'll talk a little bit about it. One of the things that, like I said, I'm not going to talk about suicide or sudden death. That's a different kind of experience. But if any of us are dying from a terminal illness, or a loved one is dying from terminal illness, there are certain things that we can pick up on when the time is near. And by the way, I don't know how many of you have heard, but Bernie died a few nights ago. And I got a chance to be over at Bernie and Susan's house the afternoon that he passed. He passed after I left, but while I was sitting there, I knew that we were just hours away. And some of the signs you might look for are increased sleep. A person who is approaching death will tend to sleep more. This is probably the first sign that I knew that even a week or two ago that Bernie was probably coming close to, because he was sleeping more. That sleep stage will transition into coma. And a majority of people who are toward the end go from sleep into coma. Now for family members, this can be distressing, because it can be very suddenly this person who's been sleeping, and maybe you could rouse them up a little bit, maybe take a drink of water, or how you feeling, or something like that. The person doesn't respond anymore. It gets scary. It's not. It really shouldn't be. The coma is a natural stage. Now, some people are in it for longer than others. I've seen people in the coma stage for 3 days. I've seen other people in it for just a couple of hours. But one of the things we don't realize is that our bodies and our brains have a natural process already programmed into them. We know how to die. I mean, we fight to live, you know. It seems contradictory. That's part of human nature. We fight to live, but when it comes, our body knows how to die. And it goes through these stages of resting more, going into the coma, and then finally expiration. What does it look like in the hours just before a person's dying? Well, one of the things you can look for, I don't usually start yanking the blankets off of people. That seems kind of rude. But when someone I suspect is close to death, sometimes I get a chance to look at their feet and ankles. And you will see a purple mottling in the extremities, like the feet. Sometimes you'll see it in the tips of the fingers as well. The fingers will start to turn slightly blue. This is natural. What is happening is that the body is shutting down stage by stage. And the body is saying, I am getting ready to let go. I no longer need to send the circulation down to the feet and the legs like I used to. And so you'll see that patterns in a lot of times. Another thing you might hear is the change in breathing. And toward the end, some people have what they call a death rattle. Has anyone ever heard that? Yeah. Sometimes it can be kind of disturbing to hear, but what is happening is that the airway in the throat is just relaxing, so that the passage of air is going in and out over these relaxed tissues in the throat, and you begin. It sounds horrible to people who've never heard it, but the person is not suffering who's making the noise. And by the time the person is making that rattle, they usually are not experiencing much of the pain that whatever disease they may be dying from has caused them. Dying, the last hours very often of dying can be very peaceful for the person who has been suffering terribly up to that point. And so as the body gets ready to let go, the brain is starting to shut down, consciousness is starting to shut down, to a certain point at least. The pain receptors are starting to shut down. It's all very systematic. I've seen some beautiful things, if I can call it that, with people dying. We had one instance where a family was around their loved one, and I walked in there, and the person had been holding on for about 2 days. I said, is there anything that you can think of that this person never finished? No. Is there anybody who should be in this room who can't be in this room? And they said, well, she has a son out in California. He's a businessman, and he can't get away in time to see her. I said, call her up, call him up. So they called him up, and they put him on the phone, and I explained to him what the situation was. And I said, I think your mother needs to hear your voice one more time. And we put the phone next to her ear, and she couldn't talk, but he said something to the effect, Mom, I love you, and it's time you can let go, and I'm thinking of you, and you've been a good mother and all that, and it's okay for you to go. And he just maybe just talked for about 5 minutes, and then I took the phone and thanked him, and let him know if he needed anything, he'd call us back. I hung up, she was gone in 5 minutes. So she needed to hear him. She needed to hear his voice one last time. Sometimes people, even in that coma, will hang on for that one thing. Other times people are ready to go. Sometimes there's unfinished business and they need that sense of closure. One thing about comas, and it's not well understood by the medical community, is how much the person perceives, even in a coma. In a coma, you don't feel much pain, you don't feel hunger, you don't feel thirst, you certainly don't feel like getting up and running around. But they may hear certain things that certain people, particularly familiar voices, say. Be careful what you say as well. Some years ago, a woman, she seemed like she was going to go on forever. She was in her 80s. She played the organ for her church and everything like that. She was a delightful person. But she was involved in a terrible car accident. And she hung on for about 7 or 8 days after the accident. And she went into the coma. And I had gone in to see her and the family, and I was holding her hand for a little bit. I could feel the hand getting cold. She was comatose, but the daughter was starting to talk about what needed to be done after her mother was gone, and I could feel a twitch in that hand. The last bit of physical movement I think that woman ever made. I think she heard her daughter talking about what to do after. She didn't like it. So be careful what you say.
Yeah.
Okay? Careful what you say. Finally, she was gone. And the other thing that often distresses people is that, particularly when they're in this pre-coma stage, but they're going in and out of sleep, is that they stop eating. That's natural. The body is saying, I no longer need sustenance. So the person no longer feels a need to eat. And I've known some families that get really distressed. Oh, he isn't eating anymore. We can't get him to eat. He won't even take a piece of fruit or applesauce or anything like that. He's just stopped. And you have to tell him it's natural. The body knows how to die. We all know how to die. The choice for us is whether we, up to that moment that we don't have any more control over it, that we live well. My own philosophy, if you call it that, was deeply influenced by Jean-Paul Sartre. I read for the first time as a junior in high school. I know he was kind of heavy to read at that age, but I did. And Sartre was one of the leaders of the existentialist movement following the Second World War. And what Sartre said was that life itself has no intrinsic meaning of its own, but that we have radical freedom to shape our lives to have meaning. In other words, we're not born with a call to do this or that. We may have certain innate talents that we build upon and find fulfillment using, but it's our choice to use those talents. And so life itself, I'm not concerned about whether there's life after death or not. I'm kind of skeptical, and we're not going to get in an argument about it. I'm kind of skeptical that there is, but I don't know if there's any proof of it. It'd be nice to know, because there are times I thought, gee, there's one more time I'd like to have a conversation with my mom. And I've had to deal with the reality that that's probably I've had the last conversation I've ever had with her. One of the things that I found in the years since she died, my mom and I moved from becoming mother and son to mother and a good friend. We actually became good friends with each other toward the end. And there were times when I'd see a movie or I'd read a book and I'd you know, next time I talk to her, I think, you gotta read this book, you gotta do this, or see this movie, or whatever, you know, and stuff like that. And every now and then I find myself thinking, you know, I'm watching something, and man, Mom would really like this. And then, of course, I realize, wait a minute, I can't tell her about it anymore. Now, she's been gone since 2008. And one of the things about, even though I was ready for her to go in many ways, my way of grieving hit me, I didn't cry. I was pretty much at peace at a memorial service. In fact, I played my flute in her memory at the memorial service. I was able to get through that pretty well. But I used to have a pretty good sense of time, where I didn't always wear a wristwatch. I didn't always keep a calendar. I kept it in my head. But I've noticed since she was passed and that I've not been as good at tracking time. Now I gotta have a watch on all the time. I think that's part of my grieving process, part of the aftermath. We have a hard time in our society talking about death and dying. I want to throw this question out to you. Why do you think that is?
It's a mood killer.
Pardon?
The mood killer.
A mood killer. Why is it?
It makes people uncomfortable and sad and upset and scared.
Fear of the unknown.
Fear. Fear.
I think we all want to live, you know, we
We
don't
all
want to
do.
leave our life. And so it is a fear in that respect, and we fight to live, so we don't want to discuss it.
And yet that time comes for us all.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody here know that they're immortal? I certainly know that I'm not.
But people often don't want to talk about it for fear that talking about it somehow will bring it closer.
Mm-hmm.
It's borrowing trouble.
Yeah, and I've talked to people that they'll tell me, I'm not afraid of death, I'm afraid of dying. They make a distinction. They're afraid of the dying process, what they'll have to go through.
Yeah, that's true.
And in very few cases that I've witnessed have I ever seen anyone really in agony in those last hours. That's the good news. I don't want you to take that. There may be an exception out there, but and I've known people who get up to that point where they get to active dying. Active dying is where it's irreversible. And we go into the sleep stage, the not eating phase, the not taking fluids stage, and the coma stage, and the letting go. The changes in breathing changes. I saw Bernie change his breathing pattern at least twice while I was there Wednesday afternoon, and I just kind of knew that the clock was ticking at that point. That's not uncommon. What do you do with family members who are having a hard time dealing with the inevitable? I don't have a cookie cutter answer to this. What do you do?
I think for me personally, I worry about living too long.
About what?
I worry about living too long.
Too
and
long?
dying. That's my fear, that I'm gonna become.
I mean, just hanging on that stage before you're gone, or?
Right. So for me, I need to let my kids know that I'm ready.
Yeah.
And I'm not ready now, but I'm ready before I become, before I can't live independently here.
Okay, yes?
Well, it's interesting what you say, because so much the medical community wants you to put them on oxygen, wants you to put them on a feeding tube or a fluid tube, and it's like actually going against what their body's trying to do, is from what you're saying. So I think it's probably super important that you indicate your wishes on that, because it seems to me that would extend it more than it should be, and also not helpful, you know, to the person in the end.
Everybody here have a living will
Yeah.
or a last directive?
Yes.
Needs to be
And,
updated.
I need to
and do
update
not,
mine,
with a
yeah.
do not resuscitate clause. under
Well, and the
certain
medical
conditions.
power of attorney is important also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have that.
Mhm.
Somebody that you trust to actually do what you tell them you want done, to take over, conveying that to the, to the medical community.
One of the worst things I've seen, and I'm not into dissing the medical community, but they have that, we gotta keep the person alive a lot of times. That's what they're trained to do.
Yes.
I've got,
Lawyers have trained them to do that too.
right, under, people who've worked with hospice, people who've worked in nursing homes, can often learn to pick up on the signs before doctors do. Because doctors, at least until recently, have not been really well educated in the process of dying.
Hmm.
And what to look for and how to let go. That I can remember my mother. I was very small at the time. My grandfather was dying. I didn't get to be there when he was dying. In fact, I wasn't even allowed to attend his funeral, probably because I was about 9 or 10 years old. And she came in the room and said, well, your grandfather is getting ready to go. This is her father, her stepfather, actually. And he's getting ready to go. And I said, well, should we pray that he lives? She says, no, pray that he's healed. I said, what's that? He says, when he dies, he'll be released from the suffering. That's healing. That was her view of life. And I think that when my mom got ready to go, she still faced it with her own death that way too. But doctors don't see it that way. That going from, particularly if it's been a terminal illness that's caused a lot of pain, to that stage of dying, we gotta pull them back, Like I said, my father put up with chemotherapy maybe all of 2 weeks and realized it was gonna make him sicker than the cancer that he had. I don't know what doctor talked him into trying that, And it was
I think hospice has made such a big difference.
Oh, it has.
And it's been, 30, 40 years? It's amazing how long that's been there.
Gives you a
But
viable
just to
alternative.
say palliative care.
Mhm.
And I think that they've done a huge job in educating doctors.
And there are doctors now who are better trained in that area.
Yeah, and more acceptable.
Now, one of the things that, not just doctors, but paramedics can sometimes, and I understand why. You rush in, your job is to save that person's life, and then you lose them anyway. You feel a sense of defeat. I've known paramedics. I was attached to the volunteer fire department in Metamora, Ohio for a few years, and I knew paramedics that worked for the fire department. And you never score, you never bat 1,000 out of all the cases that you've got. And I can remember way back when I was working in the nursing home, a woman who had no directive. She was she was really frail physically. But she had a heart attack. And they called in the paramedics, and I wish they hadn't. Because what what you do when a person has a heart attack? Chest compressions.
Yeah. Which you
And
can actually break through.
her ribs broke.
Yeah.
One of the chest compressions, which made it worse. Well, fortunately for her, she died 2 days later. But, sometimes these things happen. The intentions are right, but the medicine is wrong, if that makes sense. And, the one thing that we don't want to see anybody do is suffer. Anyone got anything you wanna share or say on this matter? You know that if you are attendant of a friend or family member who is passing and other family members are getting distressed about, we can't wake him up, you can assure them, this is natural. If he stops eating 2 or 3 days before passing, you can see that the person is sleeping more. And you know what the outcome is gonna be anyway. Don't worry about it. It's natural. The body knows how to die. We don't always like to acknowledge that, but somewhere in the back of our brain is a little program that will tell our body when it's time to start shutting down. Circulation will start to shut down, digestion will start to shut down, pain receptors will start to shut down, and when that moment comes, very often, there's just that one last exhalation as the chest relaxes and the person doesn't take another breath in. Yes?
I had a neighbor who, was very close to my daughter. She at one point said, I wish Susie was my grandmother. And I said, absolutely, she's the best. And she was in hospice, and so my daughter lives in Chicago. And I asked her dad to bring her here so she could say goodbye and see how peaceful she was. He was glad that that happened.
Anyone else have anything? Yes?
The thing about giving permission for the person to let go, it's something that I had heard about before I had to kind of help somebody put it to use. A very dear friend of mine was approaching end stage with AIDS, and this is back before they had all of the protocols and the medications that can help them live with it now. And I happened to have visited that weekend, and so I stayed a little longer. And when that time came, and his mother was very emotional, of course, and I felt like my contribution was to tell him it's okay, give him permission to let go. And it took her a little while to control enough to do that, but she did, and we heard that last breath. It really is true that sometimes the person who is taking too long to die needs to hear that from somebody, and it's got to be the right person. But yeah.
And I don't look at it like you're encouraging them to
No,
get rid
no.
of them, you know. The idea is that you're granting them peace that they need.
Yeah, well, it's as though he were struggling to hang on. And, you know, the sounds, the variety of sounds, but he wasn't able to speak clearly. I think he was at some stage of unconsciousness there, but I had heard that and felt that was my contribution, was to help her help him.
Yeah, sometimes, and I've been in situations where I've gone in, somebody in ICU, and they've got all kinds of hoses going in and out of them. You know, it's hard to know whether they're fighting to live or they're fighting the hoses or the connected.
Yeah.
It's really hard to know. They can't tell us. But my intention today is not to impress any of you, but to help us be at peace with what's a natural process, and to recognize ways in which we can support each other when someone we love is in the process of dying. And to know what the signs are, and to know if they're natural. They're natural, they're not bad. They're unusual because we've never seen them in that person before, and never will again in that particular individual. But you know, the hard part often is for the living, because then the grieving. Suddenly there's a hole in your life. Someone who's been important to you is no longer there, and you have to live the rest of your life without that person being present, and that can be very painful for those of us that survive, particularly initially. Story that a hospice chaplain once shared with me was a fable. I guess you call it a fable, parable, whatever. A woman had just lost her husband, and she was walking home. And she had to take a path through the woods to get to her house. And suddenly, in the middle of her path, there was a tiger. And she knew that she could not get over the tiger, she couldn't get past the tiger, and so she stood there while the tiger sat in her path looking at her. And while she stood there, a person came by and asked her what she needed, and the woman says, "I cannot get past this tiger." And the friend said, "I wish I had some advice for you, but I don't." And the friend went on. After a while, another friend came by and saw the woman standing there, and her path is still blocked by this tiger. And the friend said, "Are you having trouble getting home?" And the woman said, "Yes." And the friend said, "Here, take my hand." And so the woman took the friend's hand, and they walked up to the tiger, and they walked around the tiger, and they got to the house. And the friend stayed with the woman for a little bit and then went on their way. A year later, the friend came to visit the woman, and the tiger was no longer out in front of the house, no longer in the pathway, no longer an obstacle to her. And when she came in to the house, there was a cat sitting at the woman's feet. And the friend said, "I see that the tiger is gone." The woman said, "No." And she bent down and pet the cat. She says, "I've just learned to live with it." That's the way in which we learn to live with grief. So grief can seem so insurmountable at the beginning. We never get completely, the more we love someone, the more there's an edge of, we always miss them. There's always that space where they used to be. Nobody will fill it. For some people, they may remarry, but the new spouse doesn't take the place of the old spouse. My grandmother was married twice. Nobody ever took the place of her first husband. The second husband understood that. He was in fact, the second husband was the doctor to the first. But anyway, but he didn't try to take the place of the spouse she had lost. He took his own place in her life and supported her from there, and recognized that. And so that when we lose somebody, we have that hope that we learn to live with it. it'll always be there. That missing that person will always be there, but we learn to live on with that grief. And so, that's the story I've got to end with today. Anyone have anything else you wanna say or add, or questions you wanna ask? I hope this has been helpful.
Yeah, I think the media, TV stories and everything we read makes that the opposite of what we're saying almost. You know, so we don't hear about that very often, really, and so that's also a misinterpretation. You know, it gives you a feeling that death is gonna be a struggle versus.
That's more dramatic.
Yeah, it is.
Well, you know, and TV and movies don't always give you a real accurate portrayal of dying, what it's like.
They go for the drama.
I remember when I was much younger, seeing the ballet version of Romeo and Juliet. And it took so long for them to pirouetting around and all this kind of stuff, and, you know, this kind of stuff. Come on, you're gonna die, fall over, you know?
I just been watching 6 Feet Under, which I never watched on HBO when it was on, you know, and it's all about a funeral home and a funeral director, and of course every opening is about somebody who's died, you know, and it's always real dramatic, and it's okay. It's funny, but it's also very deep and serious.
Well, you know, you watch some movie in which somebody just got shot, and everybody comes up there and holding him, getting his last words out, and then closes his eyes and it's over. Word that, but most of the time there's a little process that even when a person has been shot like that they usually go into a coma because bleeding takes place to lower your blood pressure, and that can take a while.
Yeah.
You know.
Interesting.
But anyway, well, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for being here and sharing with us. It was very good.
Can I just say one thing? I came in late, so I don't know if you covered this, but people sometimes, when they're dying, want to be left alone
Yep.
to die, although they often would like to have people in the vicinity. And other people want people there.
Exactly.
So there's